They sold her to a stranger until the cowboy recognized her face. She was the fourth item listed in the ledger, not by name, by description. Female, age approximately 24, brown hair, quiet, good with children, no family to speak of, no one to come looking. The man who wrote that had not bothered to learn her name in the 3 years she had worked in his household. She was simply a useful thing, and when the debts came and the useful things had to go, she went with them, passed to a broker in Abilene who dealt in domestic arrangements that were not quite legal, and not quite anything else either, existing in that gray space that certain men had always been very good at finding and exploiting. Her name was Iris Beale, and she was sitting in the back of a covered wagon heading west toward a man she had never met, arranged like cargo, when the cowboy rode up alongside the road and looked into the canvas flap and stopped his horse, so suddenly it nearly threw him, because he knew her face. He had been looking for it for 4 years, and the story of how those two things connected, a woman in a wagon and a man on a horse, and 4 years of a search that everyone else had told him to give up on, that story is the one I am going to tell you today. If you have ever been made to feel like you were worth less than you were, like your life was something other people got to arrange, and you simply had to survive whatever they decided, this story is for you. And if you love slow, emotional, deeply human Western romance stories about finding someone you thought was lost and a love that grows out of wreckage of hard years, then you are exactly where you belong right now. Please leave a comment below and tell me where in the world you are watching from today. And if you are new here, please subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Now, let me start at the beginning, the real beginning, which was not the wagon or the ledger or even Abilene. It was a farmhouse in central Kansas, 12 years before all of this, and 2 children sitting on a fence at the edge of a wheat field watching a summer thunderstorm roll in from the west. Iris Beale had been 12 years old that summer. Daniel Carr had been 14. They had grown up on neighboring farms. The kind of neighboring that in Kansas meant half a mile apart, close enough to be in each other's lives constantly, far enough that every visit felt like a small, deliberate choice. They had been what children are before they have words for it, inseparable, the kind of friends who finish each other's sentences and share a private language of small signals and understood references that no one else can enter. Iris had red-brown hair that she wore in 2 braids and a habit of naming every animal she encountered, and a laugh that started low and built until it became something whole-bodied and uncontrollable, the kind of laugh that made everyone around her laugh without knowing why. Daniel had been a quiet boy with serious eyes and patient hands, and the particular loyalty of a child who decides early that there are certain people worth protecting. He had been protecting her from the age of 8. When Tommy Marsh at the schoolhouse had knocked her lunch pail into the mud, and he had stepped between them with no plan and no advantage in size, but a complete absence of hesitation. Iris had told him afterward that he was the most stubborn person she had ever met. He had said that was probably true. It had become its own kind of promise. Then the drought had come. 1 year, then another. Daniel's family had held on by the kind of determination that prairie people develop or they leave. Iris's family had not held on. Her father was not a hard man or a bad man, but he was a defeated one. And when the farm finally went under, the Beals had gone east to find work, and Iris had gone with them, and Daniel had watched the wagon carry her way down the flat Kansas road, and had stood there long after the dust settled with the specific helplessness of someone watching something important disappear. He was 14. There was nothing to be done about it. He had written letters to the address her father left with the cars. 2 of them came back unopened. The 3rd was answered by a stranger who said the Beale family had moved on and left no forwarding address. And that was all. Years passed. Daniel grew into a man, and the man grew into a rancher, working land in the Texas panhandle that had started on as a hired hand and slowly, through the grinding, patient labor of someone who did not know how to stop, worked into his own. He had not married. People who knew him thought this was because he was too focused on a ranch, too solitary, too locked into the quiet life he had built. People who knew him better understood it differently. He had not forgotten the girl on the fence in the Kansas thunderstorm. He had not forgotten the laugh or the braids or the way she had looked at him over her shoulder when the wagon took her away, like she was memorizing him in case she needed the memory later. He had looked for her, off and on, the way you look for something when you have not given up hope, but have learned to carry the hope lightly so the weight of it does not break you. A question here, a letter there, a name mentioned to people who travel more than he did. Nothing. Until the afternoon in Abilene, when he stopped at the stock exchange and overheard two men talking near the water trough about a broker named Simmons who dealt in domestic placements, which was what certain men called it when they were being careful about language, and one of the men mentioned a girl with red-brown hair being taken west on the old Cimarron Road. Daniel did not know why that caught him. He did not let himself think it was what it might be, because 4 years of not finding someone taught you not to let hope run ahead of sense. But he rode the Cimarron Road anyway. He had been riding for 2 hours when he saw the wagon. It was a plain canvas-covered freighter, moving slow, one driver up front and a second man riding alongside. There was nothing distinctive about it at a distance, but something made him bring his horse up alongside, and he looked into the gap of the canvas, and there were 3 women sitting in the bed of the wagon on their traveling bags. He looked at each face in turn. The third one looked back at him. Red-brown hair, gray eyes, a face that was 4 years older and carrying a weight it had not carried when he last saw it, but unmistakable, absolutely unmistakable. He stopped his horse, so hard it threw up its head and danced sideways. She looked at him, and in the second before recognition arrived, he saw what was in her face, the careful blankness of a woman who had learned not to show what she was feeling to strangers, the protective arrangement of features that said, "Whatever you are about to do to me, I have already survived worse." Then recognition arrived. Her lips parted. "Daniel," she said. It came out barely a breath. The driver of the wagon had stopped and was looking back at him with the expression of a man who was doing something legal enough if you didn't look too closely and preferred that people not look too closely. Daniel looked at the driver. "This wagon stops," he said. His voice was entirely flat and entirely certain. The driver opened his mouth. "It stops," Daniel said again, and something in the quality of his stillness in the saddle communicated something that made the driver close his mouth and pull the reins. He was off his horse before it fully halted and at the back of the wagon, and Iris was already at the edge, and he helped her down, and she landed on the dirt road, and they stood face to face in the long afternoon light of the Texas Panhandle, and looked at each other for one long wordless moment. She looked like someone who had been managing alone for a very long time, and was furious at herself for the way her face was behaving now. He looked like someone who had found something he had given up a small but essential piece of himself to keep hoping for. "Are you hurt?" he said. "No," she said. "Where were they taking you?" "A man in New Mexico. An arrangement." She said the last word with a flatness that contained its own particular contempt. He turned back to the driver with an expression that made the second man, the one riding alongside, decide to be interested in the horizon. "This woman is not going to New Mexico," Daniel said. The driver found something like courage. "She's contracted. You got no legal standing here, mister." "I'm her husband," Daniel said. A silence dropped over the road, like something physical. Iris looked at him. He looked steadily at the driver, without glancing at her. "Her name is Iris Carr," he said. "My wife. She was taken from our home in Abilene 3 days ago by a man named Simmons, who I will be paying a visit to at the first available opportunity. And I am taking her home now. If you have a problem with that, you are welcome to follow us to the nearest sheriff's office and make your case, and I will make mine, and we will see which story holds up in the light." The driver looked at him for a long moment, looked at the second man, looked back at Daniel, and then, because men who operate in gray spaces are fundamentally cowards, and cowards know when they have met something that will not be moved, he slapped the reins and the wagon rolled on. Daniel watched it go. Then he turned to Iris. She was looking at him with an expression he could not immediately categorize. Something between grateful and furious and completely undone. "Your wife," she said. "It was the fastest solution available," he said. "You lied to them." "I told them a version of something I intend to make true," he said, "if you'll allow it." He paused. "But we can discuss that later. Right now I'd like to get you somewhere safe." She looked at him for another long moment. The afternoon light was warm and gold on the road, and the prairie stretched out enormous on all sides, and there were 2 people standing in the middle of it with 12 years of distance between them and no map for what came next. "You look for me," she said. "Yes," he said simply. She pressed her lips together, nodded once. the sharp, controlled nod of a woman, keeping herself together through the sheer force of what she had been building for years. "All right," she said. "Let's go." He helped her onto his horse and rode behind her, and they headed south toward the ranch, and she sat in front of him in a silence that was not empty, but full of everything that had not been said yet. And he kept a respectful distance behind her in the saddle, and said nothing either, and let the miles accumulate between them and the wagon on the Cimarron Road. The ranch came into view at dusk. It was not large, but it was solid and genuine, a house and a barn and a bunkhouse for the two hired men, and a garden along the south side that had been planted by someone with intention, and not quite enough time to keep up with it. The horses in the pasture looked well tended. The fences were straight. Iris took it in without comment. The hired man, a weathered older fellow named Pete, came out of the barn and looked at them with a particular careful expression of a man who is very good at minding his own business. "Pete, this is Mrs. Carr," Daniel said. "She'll be staying." Pete nodded as if women arriving on horseback at dusk was entirely ordinary. "I'll put coffee on," he said, and went back into the barn. Inside the house, Iris stood in the kitchen and looked around the way she had in the wagon. The careful inventory of someone who has learned that every new place needs to be assessed quickly. She looked at the stove and the table and the shelves and the window over the sink with the view of the pasture. Then she turned around and looked at him. "Tell me what happened to you," he said. "All of it, if you want to." She sat down at the table, and she told him. It took a long time. The move east after the farm failed, which had been desperate and bewildering for a 12-year-old who had lost the only place she knew. Her father's slow failure to find his footing in the city, the diminishment of him, watching a capable man become a defeated one. Her mother's illness. 2 years after the move, which had taken her at 14 and left Iris in the care of a father who was doing his inadequate best. A series of households where she had worked as help, some decent, some not. The final household, a man named Greer in Abilene. 3 years of service that had been fair enough until Greer's business had collapsed and Iris had been listed in the ledger alongside the furniture. She told it flatly, not without feeling, but with a controlled delivery of someone who has processed things alone for so long that the telling is worn smooth, the sharp edges rounded down by repetition in her own mind. He listened the way she remembered him listening, completely, without his attention wandering, without the restlessness that most people could not keep out of their faces when other people's troubles went on too long. When she finished, he sat for a moment with his coffee cup between his hands. "You should have had better than that," he said. "A lot of people should have better than they get," she said. "That's true," he said, "but I'm talking about you specifically." She looked at him across the table. This man who had ridden the Cimarron Road on a piece of overheard conversation, and stopped the wagon with the flatness of his voice, and told a lie that was structured like a truth. "Daniel," she said carefully, "what you said to that driver." "I know," he said. "I'm not holding you to that." "I know that too," he said. He looked at her steadily. "You can stay here as long as you need to, in whatever arrangement you're comfortable with. I have a spare room." Pete doesn't talk. There's no pressure of any kind. He paused. "I just want you to know that what I said was not entirely a lie. It was partly a lie, and partly something I have been working up to for longer than I can honestly account for." She looked at him for a long time. There was so much ground between them. 12 years of separate living, separate suffering, separate growing into people the other one did not fully know yet. She was not the girl on the fence. He was not the boy who had stepped between her and Tommy Marsh without a plan. They were strangers who happened to carry the same early memories, and that was both everything and not quite enough. "You'd need to get to know me again," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "I'm not the same." "Neither am I." "I'm not particularly easy," she said. "I've been managing alone for a long time, and I have developed opinions about how things should be done." "I remember you having opinions," he said, and there was something in it that was almost a smile. "I don't recall finding that a problem." She looked at her hands on the table, thought about the ledger entry. Female, age approximately 24. No family to speak of. No one to come looking. No one to come looking. She thought about a horse stopping, so suddenly it nearly threw its rider. She thought about the flatness of a voice that would not be moved. "1 week," she said. "I'll stay 1 week, and then we'll see." "1 week," he agreed. The week became 2. The 2 became a month. And in that month certain things revealed themselves, in particular unhurried way of genuine things. She was fierce about the garden and turned the neglected south plot into something that produced with thoroughness that impressed Pete enough to say so, which Iris gathered from his manner was not a thing he said often. She could cook well and did not make a fuss about it, and reorganized the kitchen with the confidence of someone who knows what they are doing and does not require permission. She named both of the ranch horses within the first 3 days, a spotted gray she called November and a bay she called Considerably, which made Daniel stop what he was doing and look at her with an expression she could not entirely read. Considerably, he said. He has a very considerable opinion of himself, she said seriously. Look at him. Daniel looked at the bay horse, who was standing at the fence with his nose in the air in a manner that was, it had to be said, somewhat self-important. Fair, he said, and the laugh happened, the one that started low and built until it was whole-bodied and unstoppable. He had not heard it in 12 years, and it arrived now like something the room had been waiting for without knowing it, and he stood there in the afternoon sun and felt something settle in him that had been unsettled for a very long time. She caught him looking. The laugh faded to something quieter, and she looked back at him with the careful gray eyes that had learned to assess things quickly, and something passed between them that neither of them tried to name yet, because it was too early and they were both too careful and too honest to rush it. But it was there, solid as a fence post, real as a Kansas wheat field and the summer storm, and 2 children on a fence who had chosen each other before they knew there was a choice being made. The trouble came from Abilene, which was where trouble had originated to begin with. Simmons, the broker, sent a man, a thin, unpleasant fellow named Curl, who arrived at the ranch on a Thursday and told Daniel with the practiced reasonableness of a person accustomed to threatening people politely that there was a contractual matter to be settled, that the woman on the property had been paid for, and the paying party was owed either the merchandise or a refund of the purchase price. The word merchandise landed on the air of the ranch yard like something rotten. Iris had come out of the house when she heard voices and was standing on the porch. She stood very still. Daniel turned from Curl and looked at her for one moment. Then he looked back at Curl with an expression that Curl clearly found unexpectedly troubling. "You'll want to write this down," Daniel said, in the flat, certain voice that had stopped a wagon on the Cimarron Road. "Iris Carr is my wife. She is a free woman and a property owner in the state of Texas by virtue of that marriage. Whatever paper Simmons has with her previous name on it is not a document that has any standing here, and any man who believes otherwise is welcome to speak to my attorney in Amarillo, whose name I will happily provide." He took one step toward Curl, not threatening, not aggressive, simply placing himself more fully in the man's field of attention. "And I will tell you one more thing. The man named Simmons, and any man who works for him, would do very well to consider carefully before coming onto my land again." Curl looked at him, looked at the barn where Pete had appeared in the doorway with no particular expression, looked back at Daniel, and left. That evening Iris sat on the porch steps in the last light, and Daniel came and sat beside her, and for a while neither of them said anything. The prairie was enormous and quiet around the ranch, and the sky was doing the thing it does in Texas at dusk, going through colors that have no proper names. "It won't be the last of it," she said. "No," he agreed. "But it'll be the last of it coming here, without consequence. I'll see to that." She looked at her hands in her lap. "I have never had anyone do that before. Stand between me and something like that." "You should have," he said, "a long time ago." She turned and looked at him, and something in her face was open in a way it had not been before, the careful management of it, set down for the moment. "You said a version of something you intended to make true," she said. "Back on the road." "Yes," he said. "I want to know if that's still what you intend." He looked at her in the dusk. This woman who had grown up hard and managed alone and named horses with great seriousness and laughed with her whole body, and had sat at his kitchen table and told him a long, true story without asking for pity. "It is," he said. "It has been since I was 14 years old, and I just didn't know how to get back to it." She was quiet for a moment. "I named every animal I worked with in every household I was in," she said. 12 years of animals with names, because you always said that things with names were things you had to take care of properly." She paused. "I never forgot you told me that." He looked at her. "I never forgot you," she said simply. He reached across the small space between them and took her hand, and she let him. And they sat there in the going dark of the Texas panhandle, watching the stars appear one by one over the enormous quiet land, and there was nothing rushed or uncertain about it. It was the most natural thing, like something returning to where it had always been meant to be, after a long and difficult journey that neither of them would have chosen, but that had, somehow, led them back to the same fence. They were married properly in Amarillo 6 weeks later, in a judge's office with Pete as witness, in November, and considerably, presumably, keeping their own counsel back at the ranch. It was plain and brief and completely real, the realest thing either of them had been part of in a long time. Walking out of the courthouse into the bright Texas morning, Iris stopped on the steps and tipped her face up to the sun for a moment, just a moment, with her eyes closed. Daniel watched her. Then she opened her eyes and looked at him, and the laugh happened again, low and building. And he felt it the same way he always had, like a room filling with light. "Considerably is going to be insufferable about this," she said. "He already thinks he runs the place." "He does run the place," Daniel said. "Don't tell him that." They walked down the courthouse steps together into the ordinary, extraordinary morning of a life that had been interrupted 12 years ago on a Kansas road, and had now, finally, and without drama, and without any fanfare at all, quietly resumed. Some things survive every distance. Some loyalties are patient enough to wait. And some people are found because someone refused to stop looking. If this story reached something in you today, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and tell me what moment stayed with you the most, and tell me where in the world you are watching from right now. Every single comment means the world to me, and I read every one. And if you're new here and you love slow, warm, deeply emotional Western romance stories about survival and loyalty and love that endures the hardest distances, please subscribe and ring that bell. There's always another story here waiting for you. Until next time, take good care of yourself. And remember, the people who never stop looking for you, those are the ones worth finding your way back to.